If no one stands to speak, if no one prays, these very stones cry out, I am.
Shalom, hello again, back to our series on archaeology, The Stones Cry Out. This time the stones cry out from the tombs of the First Temple period. These are really old tombs. The First Temple, of course, was built in about 960 BC, and it lasted until Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it in a siege in 586 BC. But it started, in other words, nearly 3,000 years ago. And there are tombs from that period. They are of a very distinct design, so you can tell that they're from that period. And several were found in Jerusalem. Also, in a tomb was found 2 pieces of jewelry with the Levitical blessing carved in them in inscriptions. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May the Lord bless and keep you. May He cause His countenance to shine upon you and give you peace. This is the earliest biblical inscription found in any dig, make it around 700 BC, maybe even as old as 800 BC. We'll have Dr. Tom McCall of our ministry ask the expert, Professor Gabi Barkai.
Most of us are familiar with this tomb, referred to as the Garden Tomb. It was discovered by Charles Gordon in 1883. What few people have seen, however, lies just 100 yards away. This magnificent burial cave is carved 43 feet deep into the bedrock of a Dominican monastery, and according to archaeologist Gabi Barkai, dates to the time of the First Temple.
Tombs in general and burial caves, they give us, I think, the best reflection of society in antiquity, and they give us a variety of fields of knowledge. They teach us a lot and about different aspects of life in antiquity. For example, this cave is located about half a mile distance from the city of Jerusalem. The question is, why was it pushed that far? We can come to the conclusion that there were extramural suburbs filling in the gap between the location of this cave and the ancient core of the city of David. The burial customs here, they show us the importance of family in the lives of these people. It shows us their concept of afterlife. Even spiritual aspects are taught by the burial customs. We can understand much better biblical verses when we study the burial customs and when we study the architecture of these caves. This burial cave, for example, served a noble family of Jerusalem who lived most probably in one of those extramural outer suburbs of the city, and no doubt that they wished to copy for the deceased of the family the conditions that they had in their lifetime. This is elaborate burial cave is nothing but a copy of the palace architecture which was there in Jerusalem. You can see it very clearly by the fact that we are standing here in the hall, which is the height of the ceiling is twice our height. Of course, the original dwellers of this burial cave, they entered in a horizontal position because they were pretty much dead. So they don't need this height. This height is something which reflects the customs of building in palatial architecture.
This floor plan of the tomb shows how palatial the family home must have been. The grand entrance chamber is surrounded by smaller burial chambers designated for various family members. One of the rooms toward the entrance was used to prepare the dead for burial. Gabi takes us into one of the burial chambers.
We are here in a typical burial chamber of First Temple period. There are several of this type inside this large complex, burial complex inside which we are right now. Now, the chamber is square in shape, and it is subdivided by a central passageway which has steps at its end, and it is flanked on both sides by elevated burial benches, and one of which, upon which I sit right now, is at the back of the chamber. So we have 3 elevated benches. Simultaneously, in antiquity, they put 4 bodies stretched on the benches. Here you can see the headrest of one of the deceased. This is made in the shape of a horseshoe with 2 rounded curls at both ends of the horseshoe. It is an imitation of the hairdo of the Egyptian deity Hathor. The bodies were stretched on top of the benches, and then after approximately a year they took the bones and the burial gifts which were deposited together with the bodies. They took them down into a hollow area underneath the benches. This is the repository. This is here the entrance of the repository, and inside this repository we still see the bones of the deceased, part of which could well be original bones dating back to First Temple period.
There is another chamber at the rear of the complex where archaeologists found the remains of 3 sarcophagi, or stone coffins, hewn out of the living rock. This burial custom is referred to in 2 Kings 22:20. Behold, therefore, I will gather thee unto thy fathers, and thou shalt be gathered into thy grave in peace. These ossuary, on display at the Israel Museum, were used to hold the bones of the deceased. The director of the museum talks about one very special ossuary, bearing the name of the high priest, Caiaphas.
The box you're looking at this moment is not a jewelry box. It is a box made out of limestone, the local stone. And during the period of the Second Temple, the bones of the dead were deposed in such boxes. And therefore it's called an ossuary. In Latin, os, O-S, means bone. And such boxes, after the bones were deposited in them, usually were then put into caves in a protected area where sometimes whole families kept together the bones of their family. We have maybe hundreds of thousands of boxes like this, ossuaries, that were found in the country. But this ossuary is so special because it has an inscription which mentions the bones, the name of the bones of the person that was buried in the box. And the name that is mentioned in here is Josephus Caiaphas. And the family of Caiaphas is well known to us from several sources. The first source being the Talmud. We know about the family that they were high priests in the temple. They were not often liked at the period. But it was apparently a very aristocratic family belonging to the group of Jews who were called the Sadducees. And the second case we know the name from is from the New Testament. And this is one of the very few cases that we have an archaeological evidence for the New Testament.
One of the finds we understand in a tomb similar to this, a similar time, was a great discovery of scripture portion. And could you describe that for us?
The truth is, I could stand here for several hours and tell you about that discovery. It was made about a mile and a half from here, on the western side of ancient Jerusalem, not far from the Jerusalem railway station. The place there is known as Ketef Hinnom, or the shoulder of Hinnom. We excavated there, under my directorship, 7 burial caves dating back to the 7th century BC. One of them was looted in antiquity, but the repository underneath one of the benches escaped the fate of the rest of the cave, and it included all the goodies which were placed there together with the deceased. All the burial gifts and the burial furniture were found in their original position inside the repository, thanks to the fact that as a result of an earthquake, one layer of the ceiling got unpeeled, collapsed and buried the contents of the repository underneath it, and the looters thought that the top of the unpeeled rock from the ceiling is the floor, and therefore they left it untouched. We had there a gusher of finds. More than 1,000 objects in one chamber, about 300 intact pottery vessels were found there, about 40 arrowheads of iron, all kinds of pieces of jewelry, about 120 pieces of silver, and various other precious metals and precious objects, semi-precious stones, etc. Among the finds, there were also two small, tiny pieces which looked like cigarette butts, rolled up tiny objects, each of them less than an inch in length and less than half an inch in diameter. They were made of pure silver. They were discovered by a young American lady. The first one was observed by her still in the ground. Her name is Judith Headley from Toledo, Ohio. The object, it took us about 3 years to unroll it, and to our surprise, it was made of pure silver, 99% of silver, and it looked like a strap of silver. It was densely covered with very delicately scratched characters in the ancient Hebrew script. The first word to be deciphered was, to my surprise, the name of the Lord, the Tetragrammaton, or what we anglicize sometimes as Jehovah, Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey, which appears in the Hebrew Bible whenever the English Bible has the word the Lord. Later on, we discovered that the name of the Lord, which was for the first time discovered in the city of the Lord in Jerusalem, keeps reappearing several more times. And of course, that repetition rings a bell, and we came up with the decipherment of the inscription, and it included on both plaques versions of the priestly benediction, which appears in the Bible in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24 to 26. The Lord bless thee and keep thee, etc. But of course, in the Hebrew original, the words start with Yevarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha, Lord bless thee and keep thee. Now, the text is slightly different than the Masoretic text, which is preserved in the Bible. The differences are slight, but very interesting. They teach us, of course, about the history of the text and how it was transferred down to us through the generations. More than that, these words, these biblical verses, are the oldest biblical verses that we own. They belong to the 7th century BC, to the time of Prophet Jeremiah, to the time of King Josiah. They predate the very famous Dead Sea Scrolls by several centuries. And that is the most important significance of this discovery, because we have here biblical verses which belong to the time of the Davidic dynasty, First Temple period, much before the canonization of the biblical text, much before it got crystallized and copied and brought down to us via the chain of generations of copiers as we have it today. So this is before the final crystallization of the text. This is important. And it is important also to see a text which is so slightly changed for more than 2,600 years.
The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Coming up, we'll examine the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls and witness further evidence of the Bible's impeccable accuracy.
Come with Zola Levitt and see for yourself the land of the covenant.
Other people said they went on cruises and trips like this, and it was all historical, and they saw a lot of sights, but this was spiritual, and this was really good. So I'm really glad I picked Zola Levitt's group to tour the Holy Land.
Tour the Holy Land with Zola Levitt. Call or write for more information.
It's dawn in Israel, and archaeologist Steve Fahn prepares to take a reading on the sun, about to appear above the distant mountains. This is Qumran, the home of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's here that Steve has come to make his calculations based upon this ancient sundial. The device was found among the ruins of Qumran in 1954. Steve has placed a makeshift blue straw in the place of an original metal pin, and the shadow formed indicates the exact time of day as well as the time of year. The sundial informed the Essenes, who originally used it here 2,000 years ago, exactly when they should observe important events such as Passover. The view from the adjacent mountains looking toward the ruins of the Essene community is quite spectacular, as the Dead Sea glistens in the background. Tom joined Steve in a climb of the mountains to the site where the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered. The subject of the scrolls continues to fascinate and intrigue.
We're sitting about 150 yards above the Dead Sea, and this is just about a kilometer, 2/3 of a mile to the north of here at Qumran, where the Essenes lived. And here, a little less than 2,000 years ago, some of the inhabitants of Qumran got their prized scrolls and hid them in jars and carried them up to this cave that's right behind me here.
That's one of the caves that they put the jars in.
This was the first cave that was discovered this century. In 1947, in the winter, a shepherd was following his sheep up the Rift Valley here, and according to the original story, he was chasing them up into the hills looking for him, and threw a rock to scare it back down, and saw this hole, threw the rock into the hole in the cave, and heard some clinking inside. And that's when the whole saga began.
He knew it sounded different from hitting a rock, and came to investigate then.
That's right. One story says that he thought that there was a genie inside that was protecting a treasure, so he went down and got his brother to come back up with him so that one of them could go in and the other one could go for help if the genie ended up capturing him. So they went inside and were disappointed only to find these leather things inside these jars instead of treasure.
But it turned out to be one of the greatest treasures for mankind.
Indeed.
Now you have a sample of one of the scrolls that was found. What does it say? What's
Well,
its
this is
purpose?
a replica of a scroll that was taken apart, and now I've taken the pieces of from various places and put it back together. It's called the Community Rule, or the Manual of Discipline, which is the listing of the rules. The first two sheets deal with the entrance into the community. The novices, as they enter after 2 years of their novitiate, end up saying, first of all, that they and their fathers have sinned, and they have sinned, and that they were calling on God for his cleansing of their sins as they actually entered into the waters of Essene baptism for entrance into the site.
The waters of baptism here at Qumran were called mikvaot. Just a short distance from here, John the Baptist immersed the Lord in the waters of the Jordan River. Interestingly, John had much in common with the Essenes.
They came out to the wilderness to try to keep the rules in the Torah the way that that God meant it in the Torah, and the laws of Moses. They wanted to apply to their own lives, and they felt they were called to the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord. And they said the way of the Lord is the midrash of the Torah. That means the study of the Torah. So they always had one person in their community studying it all day long, and then every third night they had a vigil in which everyone studied it together.
So day and night, somebody or the whole community was studying the Torah.
And they were studying the Torah with a new angle than their predecessors. They were studying in the light of the prophets, which was a very important element that a man by the name of the teacher of righteousness brought to them. And also his successors, known as the Maskilim, the spiritual leaders of the group, carried on in that tradition.
Steve, I see you have discovered some interesting stones there in Qumran. What do they have to do with it?
One of the things that the Essenes did, which they carried on and came out of their priestly background, was in designating roles and levels within their community, they used lots to determine these things. And there at the site, they found, it was found back in the 50s, some 50 of these little clay balls, which were...
I see they're round and they have pierced holes in them.
Yeah, they have different numbers of holes. Each year, a person would receive a new lot, a new number, and they all answered to one another, sat in order according to the level which they and ranking that they received from this, and also within the community of Qumran itself, which was a very special community compared to all the other communities where there were also married Essenes living. They actually, on a daily basis, used these to determine who carried out which role, which is similar to what the Levites did every day up in the temple, where in the gates they would determine their roles and their ranks and their jobs according to lot.
And they understood this was the evidence of divine leading when they drew the lot?
Well, yes, and it says in the Old Testament that that man casts the lot, but God determines the outcome.
Lots are mentioned 24 times in the Bible. In Joshua 18:10 we read, "And Joshua cast lots for them in Shiloah before the Lord. And there Joshua divided the land unto the children of Israel according to their divisions." In the book of John, we find that lots were a part of the psalmist's prophecy regarding the Roman soldiers' contention for Jesus' cloak. "Let us not rend it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled which saith," and this is the psalmist's prophecy, "They parted my raiment among them, and for my vesture did cast lots."
The Dead Sea Scrolls give us a very real understanding of people's questions, their fears, their aspirations, which had them prepared for the coming of the Messiah. Today, we can look back at that and see that the Gospels that we hold in our hands do very much reflect that historical context.
My time with Steve had really piqued my interest in the cave behind him during the interview, so I decided to have a look for myself. Among the more valuable writings found in the cave were those by the prophet Isaiah, originally written hundreds of years before the Essene scribes preserved them in their own handwriting. The leather scrolls had been hidden here for 2,000 years. Today, the Isaiah scroll is preserved in the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, along with portions of other scrolls. For those willing to consider its message, Isaiah's prophetic chapter 53 about the coming Messiah has become an eternal flame dispelling the darkness.
"But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." In Qumran, the echoes from rocky caves cry out, "I am." The Dead Sea Scrolls are such a marvelous find that I kind of think this century will ultimately be remembered for it being the time they were discovered. Tom, is there any other archaeological dig that offers such a definite proof of Bible veracity?
Because it's inscriptions. It's the scriptures themselves, and whenever they find inscriptions, that's the most important thing. But this is just like a library.
Books and books, not just a few carved letters.
And some whole books of the Bible, like Isaiah, and it's intact. The whole book of Isaiah. It's a marvelous thing. And some scholars used to say, well, that Isaiah didn't really write Isaiah, and it was written a lot later, and there were two Isaiahs and all that kind of thing. But what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls show that Isaiah was one book, and it was done very early.
You don't hear that old liberal teaching anymore, do you? They canceled that one.
That's right. They found other ground.
Trying to escape the truth of the Bible gets you into a lot of conundrums.
And the thing that Dr. Fawn was showing us there, that sundial, that would help the Essenes with their calendar. And as the sun was rising on the mountains of Moab across the Dead Sea, it was an amazing thing to watch him work that thing just like the ancient Essenes did 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, this was a community of the truly spiritual, even among the Jews of Israel, because they avoided the temple. They copied their own scrolls.
They were wilderness people. They believed, just like the prophet said, make straight the way of the Lord, and a voice crying in the wilderness. They considered themselves wilderness people, just as John later claimed to be the voice crying in the wilderness.
Were they thought of by the powers that be in Jerusalem as some kind of a cult or a commune? Or
that's being debated. You know, there's a lot of scholarly debate about who these people were and what this community was, and they're still thrashing it out. But one of the most popular views is that this was kind of a breakaway group from Jerusalem, and they didn't think too much of what the priesthood was doing there, and they were setting up their own brand of Judaism there.
And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Lord God, creator of heavens, Lord God, we bring forth your praises. The earth stands a tribute to glory.